Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Gavin Ashenden.
Well, Gavin, we recorded recently and you said we are doing everything we can to promote free speech and freedom of conscience. And this is something that's a really important part of what we want to do. There's been civil disobedience, civil disorder on the streets, protests, and then government clampdowns all through the summer. And the response has been violence. And I suppose what we wanted to meet today and ask, is there an alternative to violence? And you, Gavin, have had a dream. So without wishing to cast you as Martin Luther King, tell us about this dream you've had.
Well, it is a little bit like Martin Luther King. And as you know, when we talked about this earlier, I wasn't sure whether or not Catholic Unscripted was the right platform for this. But there's a bit of Chesterton, which I'm going to read with your help, which I think provides a platform for suggesting that this is something certainly that Catholics should think about and have thought about. And it throws a bridge across this very awkward chasm between religion and politics. So Catherine, it's a Chesterton Secret People. Would you read one verse and I'll read the one that follows?
Okay, let's go. And for anyone who doesn't know, G.K. Chesterton is a convert to Catholicism. They have given us into the hands of the new unhappy lords, lords without anger and honour, who dare not carry their swords. They fight by shuffling papers. They have bright, dead, alien eyes. They look at our labour and laughter as a man looks at flies. And the load of their loveless pity is worse than the ancient wrongs. Their doors are shut in the evenings, and they know no songs.
We hear men speaking for us of new laws strong and sweet, yet is there no man speaketh as we speak in the street. It may be we shall rise, the last, as Frenchmen rose the first, our wrath come after Russia's wrath, and our wrath be the worst. It may be we are meant to mark with our riot and our rest God's scorn for all men governing. It may be beer is best, but we are the people of England, and we have not spoken yet. Smile at us, pay us, pass us, but do not quite forget. Kipling's Secret People. Catherine, the reason that I came across that is because Chesterton has this idea that that the English people are going to find themselves under the heel of some tyrannical government, and it's happening in our time. Sometime about the year 2000, I had a very strong sense of what was coming on the country. I was working in a radical university, and it seemed to me that I suggested round about the 2020s, we'd find ourselves with a very authoritarian left-wing government. And from the 230s, 2032, 235, we'd face a form of partitioning like Lebanon, with the Islamic majorities in major cities demanding, as would be their democratic right, that they should live under Sharia law and Islamic culture. And with the numbers, the demography would lead to that inevitably. I partly thought this because my Muslim friends told me it would happen, and they were right. What we didn't, I remember too, a moment when I was standing in the House of Lords talking to a peer, and he said, Gavin, when is the civil disobedience going to start? When is the civil disorder? And I said, I have no idea. My thought is that the sooner it starts, the more of England there'll be less to partition for us, but I don't know. And I had absolutely no idea that it would be the killing of 3 young girls in Southport that would light a touch paper and send people out onto the streets. What do we learn from that? Well, we learned that violence means that you lose the moral high ground straight away. We learned that the place you should not gather in protest is round a mosque where there are bricks to be thrown. So what can we do? Is there anything at all we can do apart from wait for the next conflagration socially? We've learned there's a 2-tier policing. We've learned that we're at the beginnings of a police state. Are there things we can do? I mean, there are some funny things we can do. Everyone can turn their front garden into a beer garden and smoke in it. And I hope they do. But there's a film called V for Vendetta. It was filmed in 2005, and it envisages a right-wing fascist state taking over. And this state hates music, it hates Shakespeare, hates English poetry, it hates Christianity. And there's a character who remembers a great deal of poetry and Shakespeare called V, and he wears a mask and those masks are available on Amazon. And a lot of anarchists have seen this as being a symbol of resistance to the state. The problem is that it is the state that we're going to have to resist now. It's the state that's taking away our freedom of speech. It's the state that's going to pass a definition of Islamophobia, which means we can't even speak about Islam in public without going to prison. It's the state that's sending housewives to prison for putting Facebook memes up where it lets serious criminals go free or give them conditional sentences where they never see the inside of a jail. The state is, with this last election, becoming really quite serious in its ambitions. What can we do? And I had a dream. And as you say, I'm not Martin Luther King, but in this dream, I saw something that I thought was really quite interesting. And I thought, well, I wonder if we can play with that. And so this has not worked out at all. I hope other people might like it and want to work it out. But in my dream, it seemed to me that the War Memorial was the place for protest, of resistance. And one of the reasons it's the place for resistance is because my father's generation died facing fascism and gave their lives for our freedom, a freedom which my generation has squandered and treacherously given up. And so there is embryonically in the War Memorial, and even in the act of remembrance, a homage to that sacrifice against the ambitions of the totalitarian state, which begun in Germany and in Italy and in Russia, but have now come to London. So what might that do? Well, it just struck me that what we might do is go to war memorials. I mean, we might do this at 11 o'clock on Sundays for those who don't go to church or who go to church earlier. But it wouldn't need to be organised. It could be entirely spontaneous. And at the war memorial, take ghetto blasters on which we play the Last Post and the Reveille, because the Last Post and the Reveille are powerfully resonant of this struggle against the totalitarian faith. The faith, they are symbols of resistance. We could sing hymns for those who like it. There are some wonderful hymns. Almost any hymn would work, but I mean, there are some patriotic hymns. Abide with me, O God, our help in ages past. I vow to thee, my country, Jerusalem eternal, Father strong to stay. The Scots could sing Flower of Scotland, why not? The Welsh could sing Men of Harlech. It speaks to us. The Irish could sing It's a Long Way to Tipperary. Land of hope and glory, and how, my goodness, they hate rule Britannia, even though it was the British who led the fight against slavery, gave up so much of the national income, so many lives of sailors, and put an end to slavery the world over, which people don't know because they distort our history. I think I'm going to go to my local war memorial and sing and read poetry, read Chesterton, read Shakespeare, read bits of the Bible, sing hymns. It may be that I'll find people to do it with me, and one person might be joined by 5 people, might be joined by 10, might be 50. What would happen if on every Sunday around the country, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 500 people gathered at the war memorials, just to do? See, the liturgy is very simple for the memorial service. It requires next to nothing. It's simply they shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun in the morning, we shall remember them. And then you play the Last Post. It seems to me that the state would hate this. The state would know perfectly well what this represented. It would represent a resistance to the state. There are complicated conversations to be had about nationalism and patriotism. Chesterton wrote at length about them, and really very well. But the simplest way of thinking about them, I think, is that nationalism is a desire to impose your nation and culture on other people, and patriotism is a desire to cherish and enjoy your culture despite other people. And this is a patriotic resistance movement. But we need to do something that resists the state, that Christians, that Catholics, that atheists, that agnostics can join in, and that the state would hate, and that the state would find difficult to put down. After all, what legislation would they have to pass to stop people gathering round war memorials, doing acts of remembrance and singing songs? Well, that's the dream. What do you think?
I think it's brilliant, Gavin, because as we said at the beginning, there has been violent outbursts on the streets. And whilst we've said many times, we can understand why people are angry. We can understand why people feel there's 2-tier policing and overstep from the state. violence is not the answer. And this offers a solution that is hopeful, encouraging, that cherishes our nation and all that we value. And so I think it's a really, I also think it's slightly reminiscent of Pope John Paul II. You said at the beginning that we were wondering whether this was appropriate content for Catholic Unscripted, and we decided that it was. And one of the reasons that we agreed it was appropriate is because we're talking about freedom of conscience, we're talking about freedom of religion, we're talking about freedom of speech. And these freedoms are absolutely essential. And for those watching who aren't Catholic and may not know, we had a pope in the 20th century called Karol Wojtyła, who became Pope John Paul II. And he grew up under communism. And it's not overstating it to say that he helped bring down communism. Much of his writings are about the totalitarian regimes that suppress freedom, that coerce, and that in doing that, we're denying freedom and dignity of man. So I think this, well, on the one hand, you could say, well, this is a secular issue. People don't have to be Christian to go and do this. As Christians, we should be really concerned about this, because we have seen Pope John Paul II said there is no freedom without truth. And the crisis of freedom is at root a crisis of truth. And we see this with the exclusion zones around abortion clinics. We see this with people being pushed out of jobs, out of the workplace for not complying with things that go against their conscience. And we see this increasingly with the way in which we're pushed to use transgender terms and pronouns that do not match a person's birth. And in a sense, what we're being told is you have to go along with this. This is totalitarian. It's the dictatorship of relativism. We're being told you have to go along with this, and it goes against our conscience. And that's one thing to be told. It's quite another when we see a government clamping down and saying, actually, we're going to start arresting people. We're going to start introducing laws that mean that you cannot do this and you cannot say that. I think this becomes a real matter for Christians to say there must be an alternative to violence where we can say, let's go together, as you say. And again, like Pope John Paul II, a big thing was fellowship. If we believe in freedom of conscience, if we believe in freedom of speech, if we believe in freedom of religion, let's go and make our voices heard and say we stand together. As you said, perhaps at war memorials, quoting Chesterton, singing hymns together. Will they arrest us all?
Playing the last post, playing the Reveille, either on trumpets and cornets or recordings. Christians are not entitled, it seems to me, to resort to violence, even though there is a stimulus to be violent, particularly for men. And one of the things that passive, creative, symbolic resistance does is to release some of the pressure that would otherwise express itself in violence. Will it bring down the state? It won't. Of course it won't. But what it will do is to give a coherent focus to those who are determined to resist the state. At the moment, this particular government, I think, has a mandate of 25 or 30% of the population at the most, which means 70% of the population are against the legislation this government is imposing upon us. We need somewhere for the 70% to go to demonstrate the fact it's not in our name and to cause the government to rethink the exercise of its undemocratic powers. My suggestion is the war memorial, the singing of hymns, the act of remembrance, the music, the poetry of resistance, and in particular the resistance to the totalitarian state that our fathers gave their lives for. And for those people who don't like the idea of the Chinese surveillance cameras that our country, and particularly London, has more than any others, these V for Vendetta masks can be purchased from Amazon for about 10 quid, and they may serve their purpose.
Where are you going to be, Gavin?
I should be at the War Memorial singing hymns, quoting poetry and Chesterton, perhaps wearing a V for Vendetta mask, perhaps not. It'll be interesting to see whether or not this suddenly sparks a ripple of movement across the country, or whether it's just the effervescence of my unconscious after too much cheese the night before. But it strikes me we have to do something, and we have to do something creative that's non-violent in order to keep our moral credentials as Catholics.
Yeah, and Scripture is full of God speaking to people through dreams. So why not Gavin Ashenden? So let's see where this dream takes us. And perhaps this is a message that will spread, and people will go out onto the streets, go to their war memorials peacefully, and play the last post, read poetry, sing hymns, and say, we are patriots and we don't want to lose the hard-fought freedoms that we have won.
And don't forget to film it on TikTok or preferentially X, Twitter. Here's to Elon Musk.